That's top, yeah. So when the blue line is all the way. When you get.
Okay, good evening. This is the December 5th meeting of the Community Preservation Committee. It is also the opening of our public hearing session, and I'm going to read the public notice. The Northborough Community Preservation Committee will hold a public hearing on December 5, 2024 at 6 p.m. in Conference Room B, Northborough Town Hall, 63 Main Street, for the purpose of reviewing proposals for FY 2026 Community Preservation Act funds. This meeting will be also conducted via Zoom. To participate in the public comment portion of this meeting from your device, please go to the town website where you can click on boards and committees, go to Community Preservation Committee, and look for the link for the agenda, and that will allow you to log in. You can also view this on YouTube by going to Northborough remote meetings and put them on the community preservation line. So we've got that out of the way. I want to welcome all visitors. Surprising, thank you all for coming. And just for the purpose of anybody that's watching that doesn't know our committee, I'm John Campbell. And I'd like all the committee members who are present to speak and acknowledge your presence.
I'm Andy Bazar, Peter Martin,
Todd Helwig,
Leslie Harrison.
Millie Milton.
Andy Dowd.
Thank you. We have a total of 7, so we have a quorum. We are able to proceed. And I'd like to also once again acknowledge that this is the 20th anniversary of the town adopting the CPA. Thanks everyone for supporting the CPA's initiative each year and for all the great things we've accomplished. So congratulations to us all. To begin this meeting, we're going to, first order of business is to considerations of our minutes from our last meeting, November 7th. Members, you've all studied them. Does anyone have any comments or edits? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Peter? Second. And all in favor of approval? We are unanimous, thank you. Begin with the presentations and review of each application. The first on the agenda is the application by the Open Space Committee, of which I am the representative. And it is for the request to contribute $200,000 additional into the conservation fund. So just as a matter of review, going back about 12 years, this committee proposed the idea that we would take each year's income and reserves and consider whether a portion of it could be put into the conservation fund, which was an existing account in the town of Northborough. And by doing so, having that money in the account would allow the town to act more quickly should there be an opportunity to acquire open space rather than waiting for another continuous town meeting cycle. And it's been very successful in those ensuing years, allowing us to purchase the large Green Street conservation property from Shunders and Rostrom's, allowing for other properties in the Mount Pisgah area to be added to our conservation area there. And most recently allowing for the town to purchase the property at 432 Whitney Street for future open space and also the possible building of some future affordable housing. So it's been a very instrumental tool. Now the fund was essentially exhausted after last year's town meeting approval of the Whitney Street property. There is about $95,000 in the conservation fund, not all of which is governed by CPA with some prior money and some interest. But by adding another $200,000, the Open Space Committee wishes to start building up the reserve again for the next opportunity that may come along. That is my presentation. Are there any comments by the board? Questions?
I wonder if it's enough.
It's a good point.
We do a fewer applications this year than
some of the things that have been withdrawn, so I consider whether we. And given how it has been depleted, then maybe we should consider increasing it.
Thank you for considering. When you look at the applications we have and the available new revenue and reserves, if we were to cover those, then we should consider, well, what do we have left in the unreserved fund? And that might be a discussion, is it appropriate to leave it in the unreserved fund to pour more into conservation? Now, I should mention, and we're going to talk about this later in the agenda, I hope, as part of the purchase of 432 Whitney, we were committed a contribution from the State Department of Conservation and Recreation in the amount of $200,000, and when that comes in, that would go back to the conservation fund. So adding that to this request would get us to 400 votes.
And that's guaranteed at this point, we're confident that will happen.
Never guaranteed. We've been going through the due diligence process with them for a number of months now. The last correspondence that I had with my contact with DCR was she wanted to know when the debris was going to be removed from the site. So there was a couple of mattresses, there's some wood, the railroad ties, of course, we have, there's railroad easement through there, so we can't do anything about the railroad ties or any debris associated with the railroad. So I did receive an email from Scott Charpentier agreeing to remove the smaller items. So that would be the DPW agreeing to do that. I did ask him for a timeline. So hopefully he'll get back to me tomorrow about that. And then they also asked me for a professional survey, which surprised me because I was under the impression that we could go through this process on the basis of a sketch showing the affordable parcel, like we wouldn't actually have to create the lot. But that last email a couple of weeks ago told me that now they want a professional land survey. And there's a sizable cost associated with that. So I explained that, yeah, I didn't have that money in my budget. I'd have to see if that's something that I could obtain funding for. And she had mentioned that DCR may be willing to pay for that expense. So in other words, the process is taking longer than I anticipated, but we're still hopeful that we will get reimbursement for that $200,000.
Thanks for following that. One more further.
Yes.
Any other discussion of the application? Hearing none, we're ready to move on. Next up, we'd like to hear from the Housing Authority regarding the application for the creation of more affordable housing. I welcome you to the table.
I think most of you have this, it's Richard's application in the back, there's a couple of photos from us that.
Thank you.
So.
Okay, thank you for having us in here to present tonight. I'm with the Northborough Affordable Housing Corporation. This is Ron Bonney, I'm the Executive Director of the Northborough Housing Authority. And he'll be presenting the application to propose affordable housing application with the site. But before we do that, John had asked me to give you guys a brief update as to what's transpired since the overview that we presented of our application at the November meeting, where we had combined this project with a proposal to create some affordable housing on town-owned land on Boundary Street. As you can see now, that's been removed from the application. And it's been removed mainly for two reasons. We went before the select board on the 4th of November to present the Boundary Street proposal. And after that presentation, there was community feedback about the fact that the Burroughs Loop Trail runs through the center of that property. We had originally gone down and looked at the property. It was either late in 2022 or early in 2023, just to take a look at that lot to see if it looked like it was reasonable to consider putting housing on it. At the time we did that, we did notice that there was a trail running through the property. It wasn't as well marked as it is now. And it was our assumption that if we were going to do something with housing, it would be possible to relocate the trail. Based on some of the community feedback that we received about the trail, we went to the Trails Committee for the November meeting and discussed with them the possibility of relocating the Burroughs Trail somewhere else on the property to keep it in place, but to also allow for the creation of affordable housing if that would be approved. They took a vote that night and they unanimously supported the ability to move the trail to one side of the property or the other. And they also requested that when the trail is moved, it's maintained on town-owned land. So I talked to Lori about that afterwards. She confirmed that that could be accomplished, that she probably want to maintain about a 20-foot strip of frontage on Boundary Street where that trail would be moved to, so the rest of the frontage would be contiguous if in fact we're able to do affordable housing on that property. So based on all of that, we figured we had to go back before the select board and sort of update them on all of that. The other thing that we found out that we weren't aware of was we thought that if in fact this property is going to be donated, that the town could choose a party to donate it to. There has to be approval at town meeting, but the town could do that. It turns out that if the property is valued at more than $35,000, whether it be disposed of by sale or by donation, it needs to be offered through a public RFP process. So we learned a little bit more about that. And it now is determined that in fact, if in fact the select board is in favor of creating a warrant article at this year's town meeting, 2025 town meeting, asking the town for approval to donate the parcel for affordable housing, and if in fact the town would approve that warrant article at town meeting, then an RFP would be written, it would be issued, and any developer who is interested in coming in and making a proposal to do this affordable housing project on parcel could do that. So that meant that at this point, Habitat for Humanity has backed away at this point, although they've indicated that they would submit a response to the RFP if it were issued, but we may receive other responses. And depending on which response we receive, there'll be criteria in the RFP to determine what the most favorable response is, and that could have some determination on what the project looks like, how much it's going to cost, if CPA funding would even be required or not, and if it was, to what amount. So to a certain extent, we kind of got out ahead of ourselves a little bit on this because we're anxious to move forward on the project. But the fact of the matter is that that we need to sort of settle the Burroughs relocation, get a warrant article on the warrant, get approval for that, issue the RFP, look at the responses, and finally decide who the developer might be. And then, once we know that, if it's appropriate to consider community preservation funds, we would submit a new application to this committee. And if this committee was favorable, then as we've done in the past, he would send a letter of recommendation to the select board, and we would go before them and ask for their approval. As you're aware, we have about $500,000 in reserve right now from affordable housing money that was approved at prior town meetings to be saved for future affordable housing. that could be disposed of, or could be dispersed through approval of the CPC and select board. So that $500,000 amount that currently exists will be available if in fact, after the RFP was completed and we selected a developer, we could come back and spend money out of that $500,000 in reserve. So that's kind of the status of Boundary Street. There's a number of steps we have to go through and the reason why it's no longer before you tonight. Having said that, the project on Village Drive is still very much something that we at NAHC support. And I'll turn over to Ron now to sort of explain what's going on and then we'll get your question.
Before you leave the subject, the reason we talked about separating the two subjects, which you've done eloquently, is that for the Boundary Street project, you're not really asking for a new source of funding. You're asking for reapproval of those funds already held in reserve, correct? For this phase,
Yes,
for what you call phase one.
phase one. If in fact there is a phase one, once again now everything is dependent on the responses we get from developers if we issue the RFP. So this may become a two-phase project, or it may not be a two-phase project. We're even asking about the year.
I understand. So you may need to step back from your plan phases, or who knows, it might end up turning out that way. You just don't know.
Right.
And we need to consider reauthorization of funds at this point in 2024.
Yeah, we should, because those funds are scheduled to expire on June 30th of 2024. So to keep that $500,000, 525. So to keep that $500,000 active for future affordable housing. The deal was each time those warrant articles were approved, they were approved for a 2-year span, with the understanding that the CPC had the ability to extend them beyond 2 years. I think, as a matter of fact, there's $126,000 that was approved at town meeting last year, which really goes until June 30th of 2026. So to be mathematically accurate, it's the 500,000 minus what was approved at last year's town meeting. But for clarity's sake, if you wanted to just extend the entire 500,000, I think you could do that.
When is it appropriate that we vote on the approvals or do we have the numbers correct before us in your application, the first one or the second?
Yeah, both applications review the money held in reserve. So if you look at the application before you for Village Drive,
we discuss it in the beginning of your summary.
yeah, so the $126,856 that was approved at town meeting in 2024, effective for 2 years, will expire on June 30th, 2026. So the money that is going to be expiring on June 30th, 2025 is all the money above that, not including 2015, which you can spend. So the 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019.
Isn't there a balance, partial balance of the 2016 money, or am I wrong?
You might be right.
You ordinarily have this stuff.
Yeah, I didn't do it because the original application assumed we were going to use everything in reserve for the two projects. Let me, prior to your next meeting, I'll get you the accurate numbers of what's expiring.
Okay, that's be fine. Between January and possibly February, we would ultimately vote on the other applications, and why don't we just say by that time it'd be appropriate that we also consider reauthorization of
What needs to be
the appropriate amounts.
Okay, I will get you.
And then that step is out of the way for whatever comes to pass.
Yes. I will get you an updated.
Does that make sense?
The other thing I just wanted to mention in response to Boundary Street was we're going before the select board on December 16th to give them the same updates I gave to you. The chair of the select board asked if for that meeting, the Trails Committee could send a letter of support indicating their vote. And if the CPC would send a letter of support for the Boundary Street project in general. John sent me a copy of that today. I think you got that for your review. There's one thing that I'm going to recommend you remove from that letter. There's one sentence that refers to Habitat for Humanity in there, and because now they're not the chosen vendor, they'll just be a respondent to the RFP. It would be appropriate to remove that sentence from the letter. The rest of the letter is perfectly remove the sentence referencing Habitat for Humanity, because at this point they will just become one respondent to the RFP. If in fact A, the select board agrees to put the article on warrant, and B, the article gets approved at town meeting. There was still a few steps.
Understood. So if you all could pull up that from the bottom of your packet. One page letter dated December 5. And that is referring to the third sentence in the first paragraph.
Who's gonna respond? You're gonna replace that with a generic reference to whoever is successful responding to the RFP.
I'm just going to delete the
I
sentence
think if the sentence is deleted,
for this purpose. The purpose of the letter is just to express the support of this committee, if you all agree, and because we haven't voted on what we were just discussing, reauthorization of reserves. I wrote the letter simply to express that we support the creation of affordable housing because we're on the CPA, and we supported the articles, proposed the articles that the town voted on to put the reserves in the bank in the first place, so to speak. And we've supported each of the projects that NHC has been able to achieve with them. Having said that, we obviously urged the select board to approve the use of the town-owned land for this next project. So does anybody have any suggested edits to that other than the deletion of this third sentence?
You know, I like to be the skunk at the garden party, but why are we sending a letter in support of something we haven't voted on in support of?
Well, I guess the question is, do we, as a committee, support the idea that the town-owned land should be used for affordable housing? If we're being asked if we would express our support for that part of the project. It is not an application per se, but could you live with it that way?
Probably, just it's odd, but I guess the point is, they want a letter that says we're okay with them submitting an RFP for use of the land for affordable housing.
You're okay with
We're
them
okay.
putting an article on the warrant, asking the town to consider donating the land for the creation of affordable housing?
We're okay with funding it.
No.
No.
We'll come back to you for that. All you're saying is you're okay that the select board put an article on the warrant that would ask the town to approve the donation of that land for affordable housing.
Yeah, and reading it in part, while the CPC has yet to vote on approving the release of the reserve funds to the NHC for the project, our committee brought forth the article to town meeting, blah, 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 just expressing that we've supported the previous initiative. So the end of the letter is we urge the select board to support the proposal to utilize the town-owned land on Boundary Street for this project. It's not speaking to anything about the RFP process or who would get the award. Only that NHC is sponsoring it when they have a track record of success. Was my my purpose in writing it as such.
So basically, everything after Boundary Street, or the town on land at 150 Boundary Street, to the part where we say we have historically supported all previous CPC projects with any of them success. So everything else in the inside of that space would be removed, so it's not pertinent anymore.
I was just taking out the sentence, number 3 sentence that discusses the project also includes partnering in Habitat for Humanity that's the way Rick has written it, I didn't realize that.
But we're not saying that the second sentence has got the CPC funding sentence. The third sentence has the Habitat for Humanity sentence.
Well, it's still, the second sentence is still true.
We don't know that. That's what Rick is saying. We don't know that Rick can utilize CPC affordable housing funds. Well,
Well,
I guess it will in that.
it's a proposed
This is
project.
referring to their reserve.
If the project it goes forward, then the sentence is true.
Appropriate, I would make a motion.
Okay.
I move that we, in this letter with that one, Habitat for Humanity sentence, be removed. Second. Now, you see that Jeff is here?
Hello, Jeff. Welcome. You look good. Looks warmer where you are.
It is very warm where I am.
You're on mute, Jeff.
Possible the whole thing.
So that could be.
We'll just wait here.
Can you hear me now?
Oh,
Thank you. So the motion was by Leslie, and seconded by Andy. Yeah. Very good. Any further discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion? Aye.
I
One opposed. 6-1. Very well.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Okay, so having said
Now you can
that.
go to part two.
Okay, I'll turn over to Ron. We'll talk about proposed affordable housing at Colonial Village. Yes.
Good evening, everyone. Nice to appear before you. Thank you for your time. I know what it's like to serve on a municipal board. It can be fun and exciting and challenging. So I appreciate your time. Spent 25 years on housing authority in my community, so I get it. So the housing authority, I guess once before, it proposed building an 8-unit building on our campus. And this is similar to that project with two major changes. One being that the building would be dedicated to veterans. And the other being that the project would go modular, which reduces the cost greatly and puts it in a lot more, gives it a lot more protection from a lot of different variables that may be coming as far as tariffs and things like that, as far as construction materials and things like that. It also kind of prevents the fluctuation of prevailing wage on major construction and things because it's kind of built off site and then assembled on site. So that reduces a lot of the variables that typically come in a construction project. Secretary Augustus actually came to the Housing Authority a couple of weeks ago, talked to us. He knows me from Somerville, where we've done 3 major modular projects, all with great success, two 100-unit buildings, and the current project that's going on is 550 units. So, modular is very successful. I know I've talked to Lori about it. She's seen it done. The factory for this is actually in Worcester, so that actually reduces a lot of our transportation costs, as right now the project in Somerville is being done on the New Hampshire line. So in order to move the modular projects, you have to shut down the highway and everything. This year, they would bring it in at like 5 a.m. to reduce that. So that saves us a lot of money actually also. So I know right now, just in Northborough and the abutting towns, there's 236 veterans on our waiting list, and that's just in these 5 towns that abut Northborough. Northborough only, the 62 local veterans, and the term veteran is actually in flux because of the HERO Act that was passed by the legislature this year and was approved. So that is changing some of the folks that are eligible for being considered a veteran as far as prior to the HERO Act, people that had served only in the reserve or the National Guard, if they haven't done 180 days of continuous active duty service, they weren't classified as veterans. If, you know, so someone like Tim Walsh, who was just on the ballot as vice president, 24 years of service in Massachusetts prior to that, he would not have been considered a veteran because he had to spend 180 days on active duty that was not for non-training. All of his time on active duty was for training. So in Massachusetts, he wouldn't have been classified as a veteran, even though 24 years of service. So the HERO Act now in Massachusetts, in effect, he would be. So we have to reclassify a lot of people on our waiting list. If they were in the reserve or the Guard, they now get veteran status. So these numbers don't include those changes. So those numbers are all going to go up. So there's a lot of veterans. There's one actually living in the Walmart parking lot that we're trying to get housed. And, you know, I mean, he moves around so that he doesn't get hassled, but, you know, there are some homeless veterans even in the town of Norfolk. And, you know, the ability to do it on our campus where you're not taking a new area and zoning it for public housing. It would be the same size as our current buildings. We would have it be brick front, have the same type of roof on it. That way it looks consistent with the neighborhood and everything. You know, I think we've packaged it well. I'm happy to answer any questions anybody has. And that's about it.
One of the attachments, beautiful glossy photo, this outline, that's the new building,
Just to the right of it, the grade one.
the darker gray. Is there anything in that spot now, essentially?
No.
Unencumbered, so is it?
Yeah, there was a community garden near that location, and we've moved the community garden over to the, on that sheet, if you look to the left of that site, it's right up near the library now. And it's been, we have more tenants than ever before participate in the garden now that we moved it and we fenced it in, and actually it was a veteran-owned company that created the garden for us.
Committee? Questions for Ron?
Is this each for veterans and their families, or is it just?
Well, they were all one bedroom, so you may have couples or something like that, but up until then, we really won't know till people actually apply, because right now, veterans still have a preference, so if we have an open unit and they qualify, they would get into that, but with 236 local people, when we don't have that many units to house.
Right.
If we emptied everything, so there'd be plenty of people on the wait list. Right now, the total wait list just for the Northborough Housing Authority is 19,235 people on our wait list. For families, it's 15,424. The rest are elderly or.
What kind of turnover? So it's really low rate of turnover.
Very low.
And
We've had some turnover only because we had a lot of people that were approaching the century mark, and a lot of their families have been moving them into assisted living or nursing homes because they offer a continuum of care that housing authority isn't equipped to offer.
So in all likelihood, I'm voting for this, so let's get that out of the way. But I'm gonna ask this question. Given I have to imagine the veteran portion is a fraction of the overall people that need, but now we're limiting the people that can use these 8 units. You just explain the rationale of that.
Because the VA has a program that is called the VASH program. It's Veteran Assistant Housing, and they have vouchers similar to Section 8 that would allow us to whatever portion of this that isn't funded, we would all be able to take those vouchers because we guaranteed the payment for their rent. The federal government guarantees whatever the difference is that we need. You know, we can take those to the bank and finance whatever part of this that isn't funded.
Okay.
You know, well, that's assuming we hit a certain goal. Right now, we're stacking. If we get the 800,000 from you, the housing authority has added 300,000 from its reserves. And then we'll continue to stack with available funds from the state from that giant housing bond bill that they passed for $2 billion. The danger there, well, it's not a danger. It's dedicated to affordable housing. The you know, when the bond bill passes, the legislature now needs to create legislation that allows that bond to be tapped and what it will allow it to be funded. So when that is done, I mean, clearly they're trying to create affordable housing. So clearly, you know, some of those funds, and Northborough hasn't had a major funding from the state in quite a while since Rutland Road. So I hate to say it this way, but it's our turn. You know, for a lot of small towns, the big towns have been getting major projects. You know, like the one I just mentioned, the 550 units in Somerville. Worcester has been getting a whole bunch of different size projects, so it's time for the small towns to get some projects.
Thank you.
I'll add also that, obviously from the Housing Corporation's perspective, we're interested in increasing the percentage of units deemed affordable in the town of Northborough. I think we've talked about the fact that we're at 10.28%. And we have certain market rate housing projects being built right now. We have a 66-unit project at King Street that's before the ZBA right now. That is all market rate units at this point. That could drive the number down to about 10.17%. It's approved. So we see these 8 units will obviously go on the town's subsidized housing inventory, and that will help to offset market rate units that are being built in town also. So besides the very deserving audience that this would serve, and in fact, the local preference will be offered for Northborough veterans. Beyond that, it also moves us in the right direction as far as adding units to our subsidized housing inventory.
So how do they know it's in the application, but the 4 units on the ground level are also fully handicapped accessible, which is a great need for as well. So that's another huge plus of the budget.
Has there been any thought about actually making the entire thing totally accessible? Other than cost or the cost of the.
Well, we were trying to stay consistent with the neighborhood. Because the only way it becomes cost prohibitive if it's not at least a 3-story building. Because the cost of an elevator, especially an accessible elevator, is really high. And typically in affordable housing, they ask you to put in 2 elevators. So if it's not 3, 4, or 5 stories, you're kind of spending a little money. You could build additional units just to have an elevator.
You would, a lift wouldn't work. Other than doing it fully functional.
One of the
Mhm.
move to a chair and then go up.
No,
That
except
kind of-
that you could do a lift, which is not a complete enclosed elevator for 2 stories. It's significantly less expensive.
Yeah, but the regulations around housing wouldn't allow
Okay.
those, at least, you know, I've never seen it done.
The initiative, the project that was proposed 2 years back or 3. And in the end, just paraphrasing, it was killed by the state because they felt it was inadequately funded when it had been. We'd been given the impression, or housing authority had given the impression that the budget was good. Do you believe what you've laid out here is not going to see the same resistance? So, you know, are you confident there won't be some other obstacle that comes up unexpectedly?
Well, I'm gonna steal Lori's term when she was talking about the other project, you know, nothing is guaranteed. But, you know, this year by going modular, we reduced the cost of the old project by $1 million, and when you consider that it's 3 years later and we reduce the cost, usually over 3 years, the cost would have escalated probably around 30%. We've actually reduced the cost of one modular. And the fact that the $2 billion bond bill just passed, and the fact that it's housing a very specific audience, as well as the fact that with the Bosch vouchers behind it, if the state doesn't kick in enough, we have the ability to go and have it financed. You know, so I've kind of layered it or stacked it so that we can go multiple different options. I have several applications in that they've done postings for available funding opportunities for housing. I've applied for all 3 that are on the street right now. So any one of those could kick in, and if not, we have the regular formula funding that we have the ability to tap. So we're approaching this from multiple different ways, as well as having the backup of being able to go to the bank and fund this.
So, currently in the CPA Affordable Housing Reserve, we have 279,000 plus. Can we assume as a committee that those reserves are available for this? Speaking, I guess, addressing the question to Andy and Rick and you, Ron.
Yes, we talked earlier about the 500,000 of prior approved money that probably should be held in case the Baldwin Street project becomes a reality, but the other money in there is available. I think you're talking about the 10% from 2020, 2023, add up to about that 279,000.
Yeah, the exact number is 279,863. That's the specific, you know, in the reserve cannot be used for anything else. And I mean, it seems obvious to me that we would bring that into play for the 800 that's needed. I just wanted to know.
And there are 2 other small amounts. There's the 23-something thousand left over from the demolition of the old senior center that the housing authority did. That could be used for that. It would need to be reauthorized just like the 10%. And there's $500-something left over from the Center Drive senior apartment to the housing corporation built. So there's a little more money beyond 279 that wouldn't get into 500,000.
It just seems to me that for the purpose of this application, that we would consider new revenue, unreserved account, or obviously the affordable housing issue. The other small amounts that you continue to bring to bear, it might make sense to get with the finance director and figure out how to, you know, get that all into a place where it can be reauthorized and, you know, just it doesn't bother me that it's all these different numbers. But, I think you and Jason have it straight.
Yeah,
But I would not bring that into. It's just too confusing to, you know. We have a reserve and we have sufficient new revenue to consider this project. I just want to be sure you hadn't, you know, different discussions about using the reserve or something.
you know, the only thing I think we should save is that 500,000 from prior town meeting approvals for the possibility of.
Understood. Any other questions for these guys? Thank you
Just
for coming.
to clarify,
Sure.
because the original application with the 2 phases was a $1.2 million request, right? We're not doing the 1.5.
So the other 400,000 was the first phase of Boundary Street,
Okay,
because Boundary Street is now basically off the table until the town's agreed to donate the parcel and the RFP is complete and the developer is selected.
not this year. Okay,
Well, let's put it this way, it's not town meeting. It's conceivable we could be back before you before the end of calendar year. Well, that's not 2024. We could be back before you in 2025. Asking for CPA money if the town approves the donation of the land, if we get through the RFP and find the developer we want and then a reasonable proposal, we then come back to the application separate for some CPA money, but that's the theory. a different deal.
Yeah, okay. Just want to try and understand.
Very well, thanks for presentation. Looks like you've done a great job on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So the next item on the agenda was actually what Rick already spoke of. So we just sort of flipped it. Great, nice and efficient. And that leaves us with the next application to consider is the Revolutionary War Monument project. I welcome the applicants. Come forward.
Hey, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Bob White. I'm the chair of the Northborough Historic District Commission, but I also serve as the secretary of the Northborough Revolution 250 Committee, which was formed from volunteers of town commissions as well as nonprofits.
Who's this guy that you brought with you?
The guy here is
I'm Norm Corbin. I'm the vice chair of the Northborough 250th Revolution Committee. We're kind of working tandem on this project.
Thank you for coming.
so the this project is will be administered through the Northborough Historic District Commission for administrative purposes, basically controlling funding. But it really is an effort by the Northborough Revolution 250. Next slide. So Northborough actually made some very significant contributions to the American Revolution. We are now in the period of the 250th anniversary of the events leading up to the Revolution and during the Revolution. And for Massachusetts towns, most of that activity occurred between roughly 1773 and 1776. So we're now in the period of the 250th anniversary. Just some highlights. Northborough actually had their own Tea Party about 2 months after the Boston Tea Party, and that actually took place this year in February of 1774. So this would have been the 250th anniversary. But the big event really was the town of Northborough voted to fund and arm the 50 Minutemen about a month before Lexington and Concord. And then upon hearing about the skirmish at Lexington and Concord, they marched to Concord and then on to Cambridge. And the Northborough soldiers then helped in the siege of Boston, and they fought at Bunker Hill. So that was a significant event, and we were planning some significant activities this spring, which would be the 250th anniversary of Lexington and Concord. So, and there are several other events, and in my application, I listed a whole series of events. So Northborough can be proud of its contribution to the Revolution. And maybe a lot of citizens don't really know all the details of history. And the objective of the committee is to educate the citizens for basically civic pride in what we've done. So in all, there was 124 men of Northborough, including 50 men that fought in the Revolution, and they were supported by the townspeople. The townspeople supplied food, resources, funding for these men. Next slide. So the project goals, the overall goals of the committee is to, actually the committee was formed at the end of 2023, so we're roughly a year old. And we started some significant activities where the objective is to commemorate the anniversary of the various significant events. But the main objective is for historic education of the town and to promote civic pride. The committee has already begun producing educational videos. We have a photo display that will be coming up soon for a display within the town of the 27 witness houses. These are houses that are in Northborough right now that existed at the time of the revolution. So we have a photo display of that coming up. We also have outreach to schools and scout troops who are for various Eagle Scout projects, for example, and school projects that will support the committee's activity. For this specific CPA project goal is we would like to purchase and dedicate a Revolutionary War monument that will commemorate not only the soldiers that fought in the Revolutionary War, but the townspeople that supported those soldiers. This monument will be a permanent testament to the committee's activity that will obviously be around for many years to come. Now, there are no town monuments dedicated to the Revolutionary War. We have monuments for the Civil War, World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, 9/11, and Gulf War veterans. There is a Minuteman statue in front of this building, and that was the one that was actually dedicated to by the Manny family, Church Street. And on it, the caption says, "The Minutemen, in honor of the men and women of Northborough who served our nation in war and peace," dedicated in 2005. But beyond that, there is really no similar monument for Revolutionary War soldiers. Next slide, please. So in terms of community support, I mentioned the Resolution 250 committee. Now, this is made up of volunteers from the various town commissions. It includes the Historic District Commission. We have 2 members serving, the Cultural Council, Community Affairs, and CATV. And I failed to mention the chair of the committee is Terry Underwood, who's also on the Cultural Council. Nonprofits include the Northborough Historical Society, the Vincent Picard American Legion Post, and even the Garden Club. We've received letters of support from the DPW and the Recreation Department, as well as the Northborough Historical Society, and then just recently from the Cultural Council and Community Affairs. From a community support, Northborough has a rich history, and the residents of Northborough have routinely funded types of projects like this, and it does support civic growth. Next slide. It's a simple monument, very similar to the, this is our planned design, very similar to the Veterans Memorial at the Howard Street Cemetery. And it will be roughly 3 foot by 5 feet by 1 foot thick. The proposed location is the town common. Now, there are other alternate sites that could be considered, and we realize that this would have to depend upon approval by the appropriate committees and departments. But it would seem our preference would be at the town common. We have received 2 quotes. Both are capable of doing the design that we have. And if you notice on the right, the design is basically Revolutionary War, April 19th, 1775 through September 3rd, 1783. It's dedicated to honor the Northborough citizens and 124 Northborough veterans who served in the Revolutionary War, including 50 Minutemen who responded to the call on April 19, 1775. As I said, we have 2 vendors. We selected one, but we have a backup vendor in case there was any issues. The monument cost is $9,780. We do expect that by fiscal year, the next fiscal year, there will be a significant price increase. We put in a 10% contingency. The price would include delivery and installation. Next slide. And then the final slide is just to discuss the eligibility for CPA funds. I know there's some issues with the eligibility matrix for CPA funding. This is both a historic project and also could be considered an open space project, and I'll explain. Overall, this meets the goals of CPA to assist communities with the preservation of natural resources. It aligns with the goals of the Northborough historic master plan, as well as the 2022 historic preservation plan, which calls for the continue to promote the awareness of Northborough history. That's basically what this committee is all about. And in that plan, it includes a statement that one of our objectives was to obtain funding for installing additional war monuments, for example, the Revolutionary War. Now, there is precedent for CPA funding of new monuments. In fiscal year 2017, CPA funded the Town Common Phase 2, and that included the Gulf War Monument. There was some funding from the federal DCR, but most of the funding came from CPA, and there was no separation of funds. It was all basically one large project. I think it was $377,000 from CPA and $215,000 from the government, from the federal government. So in a way, this project is an extension of the Town Common. And then throughout Massachusetts, there has been at least 10 examples of CPA-funded new monuments, not just refurbishing or rehabilitation of old monuments, but new projects. So that's open to questions.
No, I'll answer as they come up.
Okay, but so thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. You put a lot of time into this now. I want to speak to the last slide, something you're talking about. If as it seems to you, a good place for it is in the Town Common, where specifically do you see putting in it? Would it sort of add to the array of monuments and flags that's right here? You could go for Memorial, the larger one.
Yeah, there are.
You see it being contiguous and rather than stuck in the middle somewhere.
I think the design that we had probably doesn't fit with the existing monuments that are there, so I'm thinking it would be off to the side.
I think if you look at the common site, you got this, you have the Revolutionary War Memorial. And the land around it before the common was actually built, land around it. I think that'd be a good location. Statue. Yeah, the Civil War Memorial Hall statue. But I think that piece of land would be appropriate for this memorial. And it also fits in with what they do on Memorial Day, where that's where they've been starting right at those sites.
It certainly is in that section.
Yeah.
Memorials are due.
Personally, I don't see it going on to the real common area.
Yeah, I wouldn't either. It's kind of.
Yeah.
And actually, the garden club is interested in creating a revolutionary garden, which is basically plants and gardens that were around during the revolution. I'm not a gardener, so I don't know exactly what that would entail. But one of the options could be maybe putting a garden around the monument. If there is some space, that's under consideration, but if there are other locations for it.
Yeah. Community members. Gardens, monument.
So you don't have an exact location for this?
It's the the preferred location is the town common somewhere near the Civil War Memorial.
Okay.
But we haven't staked out an area for that, but certainly between the DPW and the people that are involved with the town common, they would have input into where it actually sits.
Okay, I guess that's what I was gonna ask is. Input on that.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, DPW supports the project, and they would have input, but I assume it would have to go through select board or others to decide where exactly we went, but again, we would rely on the DPW.
Yeah, you mentioned appropriate committee or board committees, you're not sure what that process is yet.
We're not sure yet, no. Once if we were to get the funding, then that funding would deal with where we would go.
Is there any thought about putting the names of the citizens on the back?
Yes.
I meant of the veterans, because citizens would be unnamed.
There was thought of I don't know if the price is out for that, but there was thought we could put a plaque, the 50 Minutemen are clearly defined, we know who they are, so that list could be put on. Have the funding for that
Okay,
somehow.
Plus, we have it back, and we actually do have the names.
Yeah, I'm not, yeah. We do that.
So let's assume worst case, it doesn't get approved for a town common, you said there's some backup location?
Yes, there are locations, there's a spot of land, in the historic district across from the church. I mean, theoretically, it could be in front of this building, because it's really monument there.
Yeah.
There is,
Yeah, there's also potential town owned land on the corner of Church and Pleasant Street. So there's a couple of other options, but they're not really highly visible.
And I guess one thing I'd like to see if possible is to see if you could figure out what the process is, who does need to get approved for the town common before we go on. Is that relevant or?
Good question. I like the idea personally of envisioning it as part of the memorials in that area, so it's an enhancement of.
Where do we have,
Enhancement of.
do you have a
memorial
copy
park.
of
I think we're gonna upgrade path,
letter of support
help
from
me
the
just.
That's one.
So Ally Lane has given us a letter of support and she's a pretty important one for the lab. Let me see if I can find what I'm looking
Well,
for.
she's the rec department, I'm not sure the rec department, I don't know how it works.
well,
Lori, do you have any idea?
we were told we needed buy-in from the rec department.
Oh, you do, okay.
Yeah,
We did get that,
Okay.
as well as the DPW.
we know if we're looking at an event, just as a side, we're looking at an event on the town common. And Ally has told us that there's a fee that goes to the rec department to access the town common. The question what I don't know is where the town common ends and where the Civil War Memorial starts, because that's a different piece of property. Let's see if I can find what she said. Position in the town common, the monument will be highly visible and accessible, allowing our community and visitors to easily pay their respects. The Historical Commission has done an exceptional job representing the British history of Hong Kong. So, Ally is a proponent of the town common.
And with the funding would be starting July 1st, 2025. And it would be a really nice monument, and we do the reading of the Declaration of Independence in 2026. And by the way, one of the interesting things is Northborough actually voted for independence 1 month ahead of July 4th. And they basically said if the Continental Congress agrees to independence, then Northborough backs. So we predated Philadelphia.
Your packet. From the DPW.
And full stacks.
A little more specific even, where the DPW director, Scott, states, DPW is in full support, blah, blah, blah. And will require review and approval of the memorial location or layout. DPW is responsible for maintenance of the town common, so
Oh, that's clear.
to me, it sounds like they're the ones, I mean, ultimately, select board may weigh in, but. There's some.
I'm sorry.
There's a DPW support letter that speaks more specifically that they would have the lead role in location,
Okay, all right.
but they also, it appears to be both the rec department and DPW are speaking to the fact that it will go in the town.
I mean, you put the golf memorial on there, so somebody's already gone through this process of where you locate it, what it's like,
Yes.
you get the process in place already.
Yeah, I think you folks and DPW standing there could assess where might we put it that looks good and. You know, I think you have a good opportunity there. You have questions on the project? Hearing none, thank you for coming. Excellent presentation.
Yeah.
Have your flash, like one time.
That brings us to the application for White Cliffs Mansion Design. Sponsored by our friend To my left. Lori Connors, town planner. You're on.
Thank you. Alright. All right, so once again, we have a White Cliffs project. So of course, this would be the second project that would go before town meeting for CPA funding. It's not allowing me to advance. Oh, here we go. So I figured you folks certainly are very familiar with the history of White Cliffs. But I thought I would highlight a few major milestones relative to this property. Of course, construction was completed in 1886. It was originally named The Cliffs, and it was a summer residence for Daniel B. Wesson and his family. Daniel B. Wesson is, of course, from the Wesson, Smith and Wesson Company, famous gun manufacturers. In 1931, there was a significant fire that damaged the building. This building was owned as a residence until the 1940s, and then in 1953, it became a popular restaurant and function facility. That use continued until 2014, so approximately 60 years. In 1961, the first kitchen addition was added. In 1969, there was a much larger kitchen added, as well as a 5,000 square foot ballroom. 1975, there were miscellaneous renovations and repairs, and that was really the last major renovation that occurred at this building. So of course, that's 50 years ago now. So that's a long period of time where no major work was done. So in 2014, the property was listed for sale and a demolition delay process was enacted. That, of course, was very scary to the town. And so in order to protect the building from the wrecking ball, in 2017, the town finally purchased it using CPA funds, $1.7 million in CPA funds to acquire the property. So in 2018, the White Cliffs Reuse Committee was established by the Select Board. And shortly thereafter, they hired a consultant team that was led by DBVW architects to provide a comprehensive assessment of the property, as well as do a market analysis to try and determine an appropriate reuse of the property. So that report had a lot of fabulous information that has directed the town in a variety of actions since its completion in 2020. The good news is that they found that the building was generally in sound condition, with a couple of exceptions. The main sloped roof was in fair to poor condition. The flat roofs were in very poor condition and contained hazardous materials. And there were certain areas that really required immediate attention. So I break that down into those things that were actually completed and those that are still outstanding. So in 2020, the town ended up hiring contractors to replace the flashing and the cricket at the chimneys, repairing the skylight, restoring the dormer, repairing the fire damaged framing for the roof and the sheathing. They replaced the slope roof and the flat roofs at the turrets only. So that is on the historic portion of the mansion. They secured the building from vandalism by doing a variety of tasks. And they patched active leaks that were occurring within the flat roofed additions. So those are temporary measures, and they've had to redo it 3 times already since 2020. So that's clear that that isn't a long-term solution. Also, because the tremendous amount of moisture in the additions was causing a significant mold and mildew problem in the historic portion of the mansion. So they ended up installing heavy plastic sheeting to protect the historic mansion. But really, it's just a temporary measure to slow the amount of mold that's infiltrating the mansion. So there still is mold that's getting through this plastic sheeting and negatively impacting the woodwork and some of the decorative features that are within the historic mansion. So, and another thing that they ended up doing is they put in a temporary electrical panel. The electricity is the only utility that currently works in the mansion. So they were concerned about the capacity of the electrical system to handle a series of dehumidifiers that were placed around the historic mansion, again, to slow the growth of mold and mildew within the mansion. So items that were priority items that have not been completed to date are the restoration of the south chimney. Some of you may remember that it actually collapsed a couple of years ago. So they hired a contractor to bring the chimney down to the roof line. The original bricks, as many as could be salvaged, were salvaged and are stored on site. They also were unable at this point to secure and remove the flat roofed additions. And as I mentioned, the historic building has not yet been permanently secured from mold intrusion. So when you're thinking about the existing conditions of the additions, I did provide in the application an excerpt from the study that really goes into the condition of the additions and what the recommendations are for the additions. But I really just wanted to bring forth, I think this quote sums it up. In terms of water infiltration, the kitchen, ballroom, and east additions provide the greatest threat to the historic fabric within White House. So this is an image. So the top picture shows what the mansion looks like today with those lovely 1960s additions on there. And then in blue down below is what it originally looked like. So should those additions be removed, then the building will look like the blue pictures down below instead of the top one. So once again, the footprint of the ballroom alone is 5,000 square feet. So the total size of the building is slightly more than 14,000 square feet. So that is a significant proportion of the overall square footage of the building. So the proposed scope of work includes getting an engineered site survey to identify the location of all the underground utilities and the exact extent of the building. Then so this would be to hire an architectural firm as well as associated consultants like an engineering firm, structural engineer, surveyor, and the like. So this firm would prepare construction documents for the complete, careful removal of all non-historic additions, including slabs and foundations, and providing temporary watertight infill at all removal sites. So thankfully, the way the additions were constructed, for the most part, they enclose the exterior structure of the mansion. So in most locations, they can be removed and it would be very easy to showcase where where the historic mansion existed. The exception is the second floor. So if I actually return to this picture, where my mouse is, right here. There was this huge addition put on the second floor, and what they actually did is they knocked down the face of the building. So that is the area of most extensive repair. So this proposal would be to come up with a temporary way to button up this floor. So it most likely be done with plywood. It's not gonna look that pretty. To restore this facade to its original look is a very expensive undertaking. So the thought was, let's button it up in a temporary way until the town can come to final consensus as to what to do with this building long term. So if the decision is to sell the building to a third party, then it would be their job to make the facade the way it was originally. So they would have to bear that cost. If the town decides to make it the town hall, for example, or a community center, then it would fall on the shoulders of the town to pay for that very expensive work. So some things just to keep in mind is, of course, they would preserve the electrical service. They would preserve the utility connections, but obviously they're going to sever the connections within the historic additions. They will minimize to the greatest extent possible any damage to the historic building. If damage is unavoidable, then they will take a ton of photos and drawings to show what they did. So then when it comes to recreating the building later, they will have the documentation necessary to make that happen. So a structural engineer will be engaged, and the goal will be to have the temporary infill last a minimum of 5 to 10 years. So God willing, by then, the town will make some clear decisions on what they want to do with the building, and the restoration work can really begin. So the consultant will also administer the bidding and negotiation process for the contractor who would do the demolition work. And then they would provide the oversight services necessary to get it done. So the project will cost approximately $87,000. I did include 15% contingency in that. Because this is a town project, we do have to go out to bid. And it's a design project, so we do have the ability to select the most qualified vendor instead of the lowest bid. So that's good news for the town. So the timeline, so I included the phase 2 project in the timeline. So phase 1 is the design, phase 2 is the demolition. Right now, I'm only asking for design funding. The idea would be to come back next year and ask for the actual demolition work. I do not know how much that will be, so I'm not going to hazard a guess. So if all goes well with the phase 1 and we get the funding from town meeting, I anticipate that work would be completed in February 2026. And then the actual demolition work would be completed in March of 27. So here are the goals of the project that I think will be satisfied through this project. So of course it sets the stage for the demolition of the additions. These additions are in deplorable shape. And as you saw from the pictures, they really add no aesthetic, architectural, or historic value to the property. I like to think of them as the pimple on this beautiful mansion. So it'd be great to get rid of that. So it eliminates the major source of mold and mildew that I mentioned the DPVW had said was the greatest risk to the integrity of the mansion. It restores the historic appearance. Not totally, because of course this is temporary infill, but it brings us down the path of restoring the historic appearance. And that is something that the Mass Historic Commission said was necessary in order to qualify the property for listing. So it makes the reuse and renovation project more manageable. So if the town decides to take on the project itself, the footprint of the building is a lot smaller. So we would have accomplished a major impediment to the successful reuse of this building. If the town decides that it wants to sell the building, once again, it's removing a major obstacle to the resale of the building. And of course, what the taxpayers, I think, would like to see at this point is some forward momentum. That the town is doing something with White Cliffs and is not just waiting for it to slowly fall apart. So as for the eligibility for CPA funds, of course, this would be under the historic category for a building. Criteria 1 is it listed on the Massachusetts State Register of Historic Places? The answer is no, because these additions are a problem to making it eligible for listing. So it'll remove the reason why we are not currently listed. And of course, we did receive a support letter from the Historic District Commission, and in that letter, they have stated that this is one of the most iconic buildings in the town, super important to the history of Northborough. And of course, the project both preserves and restores the building. The way it preserves is by eliminating the major source of mold and mildew. And the way that it preserves or restores is that it is bringing the building back to its historic proportions as well as historic character. So of course, we received a number of letters of support. A couple of these letters were actually included within the application to the underutilized properties grant program that we submitted in May. That's a state grant program. Actually, it's from Mass Development. And unfortunately, our project was unsuccessful. I did do some conversation with the funder to find out why we didn't receive funding. And I was told that the project is not eligible for funding for 2 reasons. Number 1, they don't fund projects that are going to be used for just municipal purposes. So it would have to be converted to affordable housing to be eligible, or it would have to be rented for business purposes. So the town could own it, but it would have to be essentially leased to businesses. So essentially, their goals for the program are the creation of affordable housing and the creation of jobs. So that's pretty much it. So I'd be happy to answer any questions, and I appreciate your consideration of the project.
Thank you, Lori. Very thorough.
You should do all of it.
Yeah.
So,
Open it up to me.
the big thing that kind of jumps off the page here is you want $87,000 for paperwork with no idea what that next number is you're gonna ask us for next year. And if we don't vote for the second phase, we're gonna be holding the bag.
I wouldn't put it that way. I mean, in order to do, in order to do any sort of construction project, like you think of the dog park. The first step is to do the design, and then the second step is to do the construction. So we can't do the demolition. Now, of course, this is a historic building, and we're interested in adhering to the Department of the Interior standards. So it's not as simple as just hiring somebody with a bulldozer to come and take the additions off the building. It has to be very meticulously done. And so we would hire an architectural firm that is very aware of historic buildings, and we'll do this in a very sensitive way. So we don't want to destroy the assets by doing it cheaply. So that is, in my opinion, money well spent. But I do want you to be aware that this is phase one of a two-phase project. And I don't know how much the money is going to be. I believe in 2020, it was in the report at around $500,000 to do the demo work. That was 4 years ago, 5 years ago now. So I expect it to be somewhat greater than that, but what that number is, I do not know.
And again, we've always sometimes taken the position that we do not want to do this in dribs and drabs without a plan for the whole thing. Right?
Well, I'm gonna get you that plan, and then when I come to you next year, I'll have a fantastic cost estimate that says
No, I mean the
everything
whole
that needs to
thing.
be done.
The whole thing.
Ultimate use.
The ultimate use, the end use, is it town hall, is it not town hall? Are we doing this work, we're just gonna dump it to somebody else, so then we've done this work for nothing? Is this work gonna have to be redone if it gets used for town hall?
Well, it's every,
None of this,
so
by
of
the way,
course.
is your fault.
No, and I understand, I'm not taking it personally. The issue is that the additions are in such deplorable condition, they cannot be saved. So it doesn't matter whether it's gonna be sold or whether it's gonna be retained by the town. The additions have to go, and the longer that the additions stay, then the more degraded those decorative features inside the historic mansion are gonna be. So it's not gonna get better. So if it takes another 5 years to figure out what to do with that building, then the mansion 5 years from now is going to be a lot worse off than the mansion of today.
I would just like to echo not only Todd's frustration, but a lot of people on this committee and in town. If you look at the history that predated your employment here, when we appropriated money as a board in 2016, it was at the 23rd hour. They had taken stained glass windows out, it was going to be demolished. We crafted a way to save it, to bring it to town meeting, to see if the town would approve to buy it. I contend that the town did. But since that time, town property, they have done nothing. The money we appropriated initially, and it's right here in our original town meeting warrant, was any cost relating thereto, including property maintenance, protection, insurance, professional services, costs for environmental and site assessments to determine appropriate preservation measures, and to authorize the treasurer with the approval of the board to issue bonds on behalf of the town. Then the same company, DBVW, final submission of a plan in 2020, going over the same things you are now asking us for again tonight.
They didn't do that design work.
Well, no,
So-
but my point is, I don't know if you can sense the frustration. And was there any thought of ARPA money being used for this instead of benches or picnic tables? Maybe securing this building was a priority because it's a lot of money.
Yeah, I did have preliminary discussions about using ARPA funds. And ultimately, the feeling was that this would be the most appropriate spot. to go for funds. So, and I totally understand, and I too am frustrated, and I've only been involved for less than 3 years, so I can totally understand why people may be reluctant to invest even more money. But as somebody who has toured the building on a number of occasions, I can see it as the precious gem that it is, and I am a historic preservationist at heart. And something needs to be done. There needs to be some sort of forward momentum. Otherwise, it's gonna be lost.
I would say every person on this board agrees with that wholeheartedly. It just seems to me the town delays, and then the last minute, or CPC will at least bail us out of this next term, and then this next term.
No, it
Why doesn't
wasn't,
the town that owns the building now
right.
have a comprehensive plan? They disbanded the committee, Todd was on the committee, the reuse committee, it's just languishing. And we have really good valuable projects that come before this board, and we always have to consider the White Cliffs. So, I don't know, it's just frustrating, so. I think it's important to let people know, I'm not the only one in town that's frustrated.
Yeah.
And I think the town voted to buy it, I'm surprised we would then think we should sell it. That wasn't the point of this board trying to save it. To fix it up to sell it, that's,
Am I out of line if I speak because I'm not on the board?
yeah, sure. So we could change
For those who know, I was very involved with the White Cliffs purchase, but I can only tell you my personal opinion. Personal opinion was to buy the building for the town to purchase the building to save the building.
Correct.
And I'm gonna say something here that might not agree with a lot of people. I never had the intent the town to own that thing long term. I always was hopeful, and I'm still optimistic that there's an avenue for someone, some corporation to purchase it from the town and take over that full responsibility. And as you all know, we did have that opportunity, but that one didn't work. But that's just so you know,
Yeah.
when my driver for all of this was to buy the building, because it was, you know, was being demolished. And I wanted it to just be town property until we find a different owner.
I agree with that.
Having the town continue to own that building is a challenge.
Mm.
I look at, you know, it's just the nature of the beast.
Well, was there any indication from the select board that they have a desire which way they want to go? Because I think that's what Norm is getting at, where there was a proposal, a viable proposal for it, they didn't like it, they voted it down. And then voted this next study, and now, but it does make some sense that if there was a design, if there was an intent that at least this design cost could then forward, you're talking about momentum, at least, even if it's only step one, at least it has a design intent towards that final goal. And then I think you're gonna have we are gonna have a far better chance of selling it to the populace here, to the town, saying, hey, this is gonna be our town hall, and this is gonna be the new rec center, and this is gonna be a function hall that people can rent or whatever it happens to be. And this money is going to save it from further use and get the design moving towards that. And my guess is that the amount, you know, that we're gonna spend is gonna be pretty similar, even if it's moving towards a design intent, because the historic component of it is really the primary goal of saving it. But if there has to be, I don't know, like an escalator, an elevator, I mean, or some other, you know, access points or something like that, that have to make it open for, that it can be addressed at the same time. It just seems, so there's gonna be a lot of hard things just like this, is we're gonna vote for something that doesn't do anything besides, you know, that we obviously know how much it's going to do to help preserve the thing. And that's gonna have to be done anyway. But if it had a design intent to it, if the select board said, we want this. And I think that's the key the key piece of key decision that has to be made to help you and us and everyone move forward.
I would welcome, to date, I have not received any direction from the select board as to what they want to do with the building. I was hoping that there'd be some sort of decision made after the town hall feasibility study made their presentation and submitted their recommendation, but as far as I know, the issue hasn't been brought up again, or at least I have not been made aware that it was brought up. Unfortunately, I can't answer that question. I mean, the ball sits
Well,
with the select board and I have not received any direction.
so that was the reason I made my silly protest vote earlier about Boundary Street. I'm in favor of affordable housing, but I want the select board to make a decision on something. Like they were punting it back to us to make a recommendation on something that we didn't even own and didn't have any control or any jurisdiction over. And here again, I think we're about a month away from the 4-year anniversary of when the reuse committee recommended what they do with the property. Nearly unanimously, the select board voted against it unanimously, and it was almost completely paid for, including all the preservation. 4 years ago. Again, not you.
You probably don't want my 2 cents, but I'm gonna give it to you anyway. Let's agree that this application, it does express a commitment to preserve the building. That's the whole thing. What I see happening is, should it be approved by the committee and we bring it to town meeting, there'll be a lot of questions about what it's going to cost. And so going to town meeting and not having a vision of phase 2, a ballpark, and then not having any plan to speak to about what is going to be next, could create a lot of objection. We've often struggled with projects here that require, 2 phases. We used to take a ballpark and vote on it and put things through and learn that sometimes you underfund it. So frustratingly, it takes longer, but it's the correct approach. Part of me wonders whether if we were going to vote as a committee that we agree with the commitment to preserve it, and we know there's going to be a phase 2, I'd like to know, I think it's conceivable to come up with an estimate for what that is. And that you might go for that whole nut in this town meeting. You said 500,000, let's say it's 600,000. And let's say the study is 80,000, And so you could put that forth and move things ahead by a year from your timeline. When I watched the timeline on the board, I started getting frustrated too. Like, you're worried about it harming the building, and it's going to take 2 years possibly to get the demolition done. And here again, possibly no direction during those 2 years. And so you've buttoned it up. You've mentioned the word if the town sells it. I'm assuming you mentioned it only because it's been mentioned by others, and it's still an outside chance that the town decides to possibly sell the property, and the prospect of even abandoning its historic preservation has been suggested. Norm, you made a good point that you envisioned that it was sold to someone who wanted to develop it. We assumed that meant they buy it with the historic preservation restriction on it. Let's just say that's still a possibility. But in essence, if this was your house, you're investing a ton of money for the purpose of, selling it. And so you think about, do I renovate the bathroom to sell the house or not? If if our purpose is to keep it intact, because we do see a town use, a town controlled use, then it's fair to ask, what the heck would that plan be? Personally, I don't know how the town of Northborough is going to stomach the cost of a town hall after what we just voted for with the fire station. And the building itself cannot house the town hall, so you're building another building next to it, which is what was proposed to be done last year with the proposal that was shot down. It was going to be affordable housing, but we were building another building on the property. So even though the reuse committee recommended it, it's hard to imagine it being practical. Unless it's a really long timeline.
Well, the new building in both versions, so in the case of the town hall going on the site, or the case of the affordable housing, the Metro West proposal, in both circumstances, they propose demolition of these additions and putting the building in the footprint of the additions.
Right.
So that's why I'm saying in both scenarios, the additions need to go.
This was a given.
And I don't foresee, and I may be naive, but I don't foresee selling the property with the intent of demolishing the historic mansion. I don't see, possibly I don't have a great grasp of what the general public, the voters want. But I would foresee that the voters would want it to be sold with the preservation restriction part of it. And so losing those additions would also make the sale more attractive.
Let's say we agree. It's hard to disagree with the premise of the application, which is we need to start thinking about demolishing the additions. It saves the building and it's a more manageable building after. So, we're not objecting to that, but as for me, speaking for the committee, object if you will, but I think that to consider this application, I would be asking for more information, which is, and if it has to come from other staff or from the select board, then I would ask the question to them. We're considering this application, but we don't know where it's heading. And just proposing money only for a study where we have a phase 2 that we haven't even estimated, still without a long-term plan, that this committee is not in favor of the lack of the plan. And so I guess we'd like to force the discussion of what might be the practical applications, and we're heading down that path. I recognize for your part, you're saying we need to do this anyway, and it's a prudent step to preserve the building. I don't think anybody objects to that. But we're admitting that it could be in the neighborhood of $500,000 to $1 million. And and that's.
How much was it to cost to put the siding on the police station that got rejected?
Yeah, they found less expensive siding apparently.
But it's not gonna be $500,000 to put that back together again.
No, so I'm just sort of
Just to take it apart.
And then put some of it back together.
Well,
So
also,
simply put, I'm kind of projecting ahead, what if we knew what it was gonna cost and we were going to the town with $600,000?
it's temporary
Don't you think there'd
infill.
be a lot of people
So,
saying, what the heck,
it's-
what are we doing with it?
It's not fancy siding, it's, probably plywood and something that can be easily removed. And when a final plan is made, so there was the discussion of, well, let's restore it fully. Let's restore it the
That
way it
wall,
ought
you
to
mean?
be.
That
The
area?
exterior, let's fix the siding, let's paint it, let's make it pretty. But the concern was, well, why are we gonna pay all that money to do that when we don't know what the ultimate use of the building is going to be? What if there's an addition put over here? What if? So that was the idea of, okay, let's save the money and do the temporary infill. And who knows, maybe a year after that, there will be a final plan, or it could be 10 years. I know just from individual conversations that I've had with various, selectmen and others, the concern was, okay, well, we got the fire station now. That's a huge expense. Then there's gonna be Peasley School. And then chances are town hall is 10 years out. So that was the idea of doing the temporary infill that will preserve the building for up to 10 years. By 10 years from now, everybody should have a clear plan of what to do with their buildings, hopefully. I mean, that's 2017 to 10 years from now, that's a significant period of time to figure that out.
Preserving it from further deterioration is obviously urgent, relatively urgent in the need. But what you just articulated is this, we don't need to make a decision now. Let's deal with it later. And that's been the history of it. But I think that's where a lot of the frustration comes, is like, well, we bought it, we spent this money where it is. So, and it takes the decision makers that need to articulate that vision, it takes them off the hook from making a statement and putting it on paper and putting their political lives or whatever, or their footprint onto, out there. So it makes it easier for it to go back into non-decision mode and thing. And I don't think that it necessarily is it shouldn't be, well, we only have the appetite for so much work in the town, so we only have the appetite for a fire station right now. We don't have the appetite for a White Cliffs thing, or we don't have the appetite for a school renovation. I think that's, I'm not sure who they're speaking for, whether they're talking about what they view their constituents would be, or whether they're talking about themselves, or but it really needs to have it. I think that everyone along, whether it's the committee or the town or anything, and I'm sure you would love it, would find greater support for a articulated vision, no matter how long that vision takes. This is what we are going to do, and then at least all the design things can start moving, even if it's that town hall is far off in the future. At least this part of it has gone in that direction and articulating that in making that vision happen, and then people can be behind that without it being so ambiguous, that it just seems like a waste. As soon as it's got a direction, it then the steps can proceed on that way, and I think they'll feel better. And that's got to come from, I'm assuming, the select board at this point in time.
If I may, one of the advantages you do, we have to protect the building or it's gonna go down. But one of the things of getting this process going, this application going, is now we're actually gonna put pressure on the select board to start to make a decision.
And it's gonna do the opposite. It's gonna take it right off their plate, and they can just go, oh, 10 years, I got 10 years, I won't be around.
Or this is another year.
I don't see that at all.
Well, that's funny, because I see it a completely different way. By putting this in and having a request, people start to stir the pot that somebody's gotta make a decision what this is long term. It could be that this might be the only CPA request that ever fails at town meeting, but it's gonna start making the community recognize we need some guidance on this, and we're not getting the guidance. We need to get that.
Well, it's part of I think I'd like to, I think in the interest of time, I think I'd like to sum up the discussion. And as the chairman of the committee, I'm going to ask you, Lori, to express that the committee wants to hear more information on what the potential might be for a plan, and that so that we had enough to make a presentation at town meeting about where this will lead. I think part one of that is some reasonable estimate of what phase two might cost. You speak to the plywood versus prettying it up, which is really just an aspect of the demolition. It's kind of how to finish it off. That's not really what we need to get specific at. The committee's looking for a commitment to some direction. And you say, well, we don't know yet, we still need to talk to people, or there was discussion at public meetings about the need for further hearings or a facilitator to see what the community wanted. The clear thing that the community wanted from the beginning, back to Sean's point, was to not demolish it, restore it, and hopefully that the White Cliffs Mansion interior would be available for the town to use, town people to see, maybe other activities. That didn't mean there was a plan for how that was going to generate revenue. But I don't think if you went to town meeting in 2017 and said we're buying it because we're going to turn it into town hall, you wouldn't know the cost of that. And I don't. But it was municipal reuse was one of the potential three categories, I think. So by the time we get to the next hearing in January, I think we'd like to hear more about, and if it needs to come from a member of the select board, we might need to invite them to come. I think I'm hearing the committee wants to hear more discussion on where the thought process is, rather than just our blanket agreement that, which we do, that the building needs to be protected, preserved. Back to the CPA word, it definitely qualifies as preservation.
Okay. That's my question. If there was any future use, because of the nature of the purchase, it can't change the envelope of the original, so we have to go back to the original preservation component. So even if they're gonna build a building next to it, it can't be like incorporated into the building as an old addition is currently, right?
So part of the reason why there hasn't been a preservation restriction put in place at this point is because we don't have a firm idea of what the future of the building will be. And the concern was that if you put in a preservation restriction saying you need to preserve X, Y, and Z, that might hamstrung the future reuse of the building. So the decision was made and discussed with Mass Historic that we'll figure out what we want to do with the building first, and then we'll do the preservation restriction in such a way that it will work with that future use. So right now, and Norm, you can speak to this. My understanding of the conversation with Mass Historic is they want the additions gone because they are negatively impacting the historic value of the building.
Correct. But from CPC, there wouldn't be any, from the funding, because it came from CPC, there wouldn't be any restriction onto how future construction might impact the original structure.
The restrictions apply to any part of the structure that you want to restore. It's restricted by state guidelines for historic preservation.
So if we spend money to create the design, could that possibly automatically default that any place that we touch towards its limit its construction?
Like
The historic preservation restriction hasn't been adopted yet. So until that happens, then no. Once the preservation restriction is in place, it's approved by Mass Historic, then construction, future development will be stymied by that preservation restriction.
So But just for argument's sake, there is no money, right, there's no legal specification if we wanted to demo the building and put a gymnasium there, that can't happen. No, that can happen because there's no historical
No,
preservation.
because when you purchase the property, the obligation to do the preservation restriction was put in play.
Yeah.
So if the town were to sell the property, it has to sell it with the preservation restriction.
So that just can't cover like the driveway or something like that? I don't know, I'm just saying, right, you literally could say, that statue right there's gotta stay, the rest of it gone.
In the end, it's.
I mean, being facetious, but I mean, that's,
It's not so much what we want, it's what the Mass Historical Commission says we need to do.
no, it's what legal guideline, what legal obligation because of CPC funding, generates that restriction.
But the
We only want the historic restriction because
No,
if we want it.
I wanna make sure I'm clear on this. So the Massachusetts Historical Commission controls what the wording is on a preservation restriction. So we may have some ideas of what we wanted the restriction, and Mass Historic can say, well, that's not strong enough. So we don't have total control of that decision. The Mass Historical Commission has input because they end up controlling it.
Well, I'm not sure if it's clarifying, and he's asking, but because we bought this under the historical pretext, that it should have to remain in historical, is that what you're asking about? Because the CPC funding, it was.
Yeah, I'm just saying, is there any sort of, what's the legal obligation
Yeah.
for restriction for preservation under this? Because what I've heard is that the conservation restriction could hamper could determine what parts are, how that future construction is made. But that would be my understanding that the original envelope would have to be basically there, and every other construction would be sort of around it or, but not attached to that structure. You couldn't put a new ballroom on it, if you.
Well, you could put like an elevator in there. And so
But not a
there
town
are
hall.
there are certain requirements that like the US Department of the Interior has certain construction standards that they want you to adhere to when you're using CPA funds. So that's why I put on that slide that, this will adhere to those standards. So there's guidance in that way as to what should be done. So there's that, and then there's also the preservation restriction. So when we figure out, like, for example, if the decision is that there's going to be a town hall that is going to be attached in this specific way, then we would make sure that the preservation restriction would enable us to do that. And then, that would be reviewed by Mass Historic, and it would either be approved or not. So that's the reason for the delay in the preservation restriction.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, but I was gonna try to answer your question. Sum it up for you. The CPA legislation is such that if you buy historic property with CPA funds, it must come with a historic restriction attached. You don't have to do anything to the building if you, but it means that you can't sell it for a non-historic purpose, you can't tear it down. If you are gonna do work to the building, then that work needs to adhere to the guidelines, which are also mentioned in the CPA. So it's kind of two different things. If the town were ever to sell it, they either have to sell it, the historic preservation restriction attached, or they have to remove it from CPA, which means town has to pay back CPC for the, all the money that was given at town meeting.
Well, that would go over very.
Yeah.
It had been mentioned.
Full circle.
John, if I could just add again, Sean made a great point about the frustrations, from residents and the voters that approved the project. We saw that play out with the fire station, the long delays only resulted in the cost being greater to the community. We're seeing the same with this. But the fact that back in 2019, the recommendation was remove these additions, if we had taken action then and got that progress moving forward, to Norm's point, I think you would have seen something else happening now, because there was a forward motion in place, as opposed to just, and that's not on our committee. We approved the application, the voters approved the appropriation to buy the building, and now it's up to the town leaders to actually take action and do something with it, instead of just seeing it sit there and rot away, which is just, nobody wants to see that.
We all know hindsight doesn't do you any good.
True.
There's some legitimate reasons for, delay in decision, and there's some illegitimate, reasons, not the right word. Not defendable
Yeah.
delays, but we are where we are, so.
Yeah.
No one can argue that taking some action now rather than pushing it down the road another year, it's better to take some action. And I'm not objecting. My personal opinion, I'm not objecting to what the application wants us to do. I don't like paying for studies anymore, ever, but I understand the need for it. I do think that there's two things I'd like to see in the applications. Some sense, maybe the architects who provided the estimate, someone to come up with some sense of what's the ballpark that is going to be in phase 2, because it's going to come up at town meeting.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you're gonna be up there having to defend it and stuff.
Yeah, and I learned,
We could practice.
We've had an
if
easy-
you want to, because it could be me.
I think a scorched earth approach might work this kind of time.
Well, DBVW provided the initial estimate that's in the report. So I'll just ask them to update it, inflation for construction costs has been through the roof. So I
Maybe
wouldn't want to hazard a guess as to what it is, but I'm sure they could come up with something that's reasonable.
And if that costs money, that's what the admin fund is for. Have we spent all the admin that we have now?
I don't think it's spent any of it.
Didn't we put it all into something? Or was that the
That
prior
was the
year's
prior
admin
year.
money?
Yeah.
Can I ask a question, Lori? Do you know, did they do any asbestos testing in those additions when they came up with that?
Yeah, so there was another report that was done, maybe a year or two ago. I'd be happy to send that out. So they had an environmental assessment done specifically on the quantity of mold and mildew. The cost of removing above ground storage tank that's in the basement, asbestos, all sorts of stuff. So I can send that to you
Yeah.
and you can
Curious.
see. So it was a report that with the actual costs for how much each of these things would cost. And the mold and mildew issue is a significant price tag. So it's over $1 million in that report. So that's part of the urgency. It's just getting worse. It's not gonna get better. So if it's $1 million today, then tomorrow it's gonna be quite a bit more than that.
So that was to mitigate the mold, right? But to
It was
demo-
all of the environmental hazards. So it covered lead, so there's lead paint, there's
to
lead
demo
outside of the building, there's that storage tank that I talked about in the basement, there's
Right.
asbestos.
Right, but yeah, that's what I'm asking is because if you have to demo with asbestos and lead, you have to demo differently. And if that original estimate was done without those in consideration, 5 years ago, whereas they only tested this a year ago, the demo will be different costs.
Yep,
So I'm
absolutely.
assuming
So
they will
this
want that
work was
report.
done after, so the testing was done after the DBPW
Right,
estimate from 2020.
right, okay.
And the mold mitigation would not have to be done with the demo, right?
Well, the mold mitigation is for the
Demo
historic
differently though.
historic portion of the building, that's what was evaluated.
Yeah.
because the assumption was made that it's gonna be demoed, the additions are gonna be demoed.
Okay.
So Lori, maybe this is an action item that that has some definition to it. If DVVW is willing to revisit the work from 2020 report, and to propose, it's, I don't know how to say it, that they're held to it, but that they give an educated estimate that we can use as defense for phase two. And if they need cost to do so, we could look at using admin funds to give them that. And then if there's they will do it as part of their quotation, that's fine, but it would help to have that information, even if it's a preliminary step to them being awarded this. And the desire would be to have their report back or their information back, by February when we're going to make a decision on the application. Is that doable? Sound good?
It's guaranteed.
Just a quick question, not to prolong, is there ARPA money left?
All ARPA money has to be committed with a contract by Christmas.
Is there ARPA money left?
I don't know. I think that they've programmed, actually, I think that the last of the money is gonna be committed on the 16th. So that gives a week to get all the contracts done.
Or last couple of years?
In this case, we have to go out to bid. So it really would be
I
impossible.
guess my biggest fear is that the inertia create, even the people that want the White Cliffs to exist, at some point, everyone just says, screw it, let it fall down. That to me would be a tragedy, really would.
We're at that inflection point.
That's what I mean, that's why I'm you can't sense I'm a little agitated.
We get that sense.
Todd doesn't have it.
Why don't you go before the select board meeting and ask for the ARPA? Then we can get it done sooner than town meeting.
I didn't know there was any left.
Except for the procurement issue,
Yeah.
which takes, that you have to come up with an RFP. That's a months-long process. And the selectmen did direct me to apply for the underutilized properties grant. So they submitted, a letter of support for that. We were hopeful that we would get that money. That grant application was submitted in June. And then I got the response in October that we did not get the money.
To give you the reasons why.
Not in the initial letter, but then I had a follow-up meeting and they told me that they tossed our application because we were not eligible for funding under that program.
Because we didn't have it either under housing or under.
Yeah, so the use of the property was not affordable housing or leased to businesses and therefore creating jobs.
So I'd like to sum up this agenda item with that request. I think if we're going to bring this to town meeting, that we should know something about phase two and bring it forth as a whole. That would show at least some initiative that we need to do these two steps, let's call it all, preliminary phase. And regardless of what the building's going to be, we need to get rid of these additions so that the building is preserved. But at least what we're speaking to, the whole thing. Somehow, that would be my request.
It's a more request, thank you.
Thank you. The last agenda item, you kind of touched on it. I like the idea of updating the committee and citizens that are here listening about projects that we have approved. Last year, the Whitney Street was the big thing. It was well supported, and you've given us a little bit of a nut. You can just speak for 30 seconds. Have we done some of the cleanup and any trails development, or have they been given a green light? And what do you see as the next step?
So I understand, I did speak with Vinnie Bignali, he's the staff to the Trails Committee, and I understand they have visited the site, they're excited to get some trails constructed over there. As I had mentioned earlier, still working with DCR on at $200,000. I was told last week that they were gonna send me the conservation restriction for us to review. I have not yet received that.
They're gonna hold.
They would hold it,
Do
yes.
we own it now?
We own it,
Okay.
yes.
Cool.
So that happened over the summer.
Okay.
And so they essentially would be paying us for the conservation restriction. So they are concerned about the affordable parcel that we discussed at town meeting. So as I mentioned, I thought we were okay with the sketch that I provided. Just learned 2 weeks ago that they're not okay with that. And now they want a survey drawing, which has quite a bit of expense, especially if we have to survey the entire 24-acre parcel. So then the other issue was the cleanup.
But you said that they were possibly willing to pay for that expense.
Yes, but that's recent communication, so with the holidays, so we haven't made any
You're
progress. The cleanup of the debris, like I said, DPW Director Scott has agreed to clean up certain items. There is a giant pile of like crates, what's one called, pallets. And he said that that was above their wherewithal to remove. So I'm not quite sure. How we're gonna get those out.
Proposed, yeah, I proposed a bonfire at our. No, that wasn't.
Maybe not now, it's been a drought, but
When we get the new fire station. Wait for them.
Oh, and then another thing, he sent me an email this evening, concerned about people dumping on site. So he had to ask the town administrator if she would be okay with them putting some rocks to prevent vehicles from going into the site to dump.
There's a lot of barbed wire there too, right?
I don't remember seeing barbed wire. There was some stuff that's just buried.
Yeah, Brian
It's
Goff
buried
from
under.
Trails had mentioned that there was a lot of barbed wire.
attached to trees and so on.
Okay. Yeah, there is stuff associated with railroad that we can't do anything with. So that's kind of where that stands.
At least we've done.
Yeah. And the dog park is coming along
Oh, wow.
great. They
Wow.
should be paving next week.
So,
They've done a lot of work over the last couple of months. Over the winter, the fencing will be installed. And hopefully, once the fencing's installed, we'll be able to open up informally. And then the park will be finished as soon as the construction period starts up again in the spring, which is usually, depending on weather, early April.
it's what, 10 years or 20 years in the making, probably?
Yeah.
Yeah,
The
it's-
timeline.
they're doing a nice job. I'm really happy with the quality of their workmanship, so.
And it is tying into the water and Marlboro, right? They did it.
They did. So they've already made that connection. They did a lovely little patch, which I was super impressed with. When you're in this line of work and they have clean lines around the patch, that's really exciting.
Thank you. Okay, the only thing is to agree that our next meeting is January 2nd, and we will continue the public hearing. Hearing none on that. Any other business anyone wants to bring forward?
Could we say something before you guys close?
Sure, can you identify yourself?
Sure, my name is Mallory Durrett on Boundary Street.
Hi.
Good evening, and a bunch of us that were here are from the Boundary Street and Windsor Lane area, so, you know, we came for the part with the affordable housing stuff. it just, one of our concerns, you know, that parcel of land there, it's just been there, it's a corridor for wildlife that's been, you know, for the past 20 years I've been there. And I'm sure many more, it's just, we hate to see it go. So we just wanted to come and see if there's anything we can do to keep that preserved. That's, you know.
I mean, if I may, I'm just gonna echo that. I mean, I've been a resident on Windsor Lane for 24 years. And that corridor specifically that's being looked at, that parcel, is really a way for the wildlife to get from across Boundary Street over into the back area that's preserved. We see everything, bobcats, deer, fisher cats, turkeys. I mean, that's 20 in my backyard. We're concerned about that. We would also be concerned about the pollution that might bring. As another, because we have folks that are actually walking up and down Boundary, cleaning up that street.
Yeah.
All the time, because once somebody throws something out the window, we're concerned about the watershed that's on the other side of the street. Right? And that's a legitimate concern to see the swans out there, you see things floating, or, you know. We also are concerned that traffic, which is horrendous on Boundary Street.
It's
If
already.
anybody's ever been there, getting in and out, I mean, it would be a nightmare for that particular area. And again, the trail, which we heard tonight for the first time, that there was some option to maybe move that trail, but I'm a runner and we have other runners just in the community are right there that use those trails. So we would propose that an alternate site potentially be looked at in order to preserve that element for just the wildlife and again the traffic.
Well, and also, I mean, talking to the traffic as well, I mean, that street as people from 290, 495, whatever, just use that as a bypass and they just speed through, they do not slow down. When my son was growing up, I mean, we had concerns with him playing in the front yard because of that issue. I mean, we had the speeding sign, the 30 miles per hour, that doesn't work. I mean, that's up and it's still, people still go like crazy. And we don't have sidewalks there either, so it's just with more population on that street, it's just gonna make just more congestion. And with the dog park further down the
Also,
street,
for the
it's
town,
just.
it blocks another avenue for the wildlife to cross.
I appreciate you sharing your concerns. However, the matter is really in the hands of our select board. I think I guess if I were you, I would advise you to attend that meeting and have your words heard. And I'm hoping there's a compromise position that preserve the things that you're concerned about, and at the same time let us advance more affordable housing, which is what this committee works on. So I can't solve all the questions, but the project's not before us because it's premature until the board makes a decision and then ultimately goes to town meeting. So sounds like there should be a lot more discussion. I think that's fair.
How will we keep up with the next steps and understanding where we can?
I was
Well, I guess I can speak to that. I mean, so we're on the agenda, the Northborough Affordable Housing Corporation is on the agenda for the December 16th select board meeting. And we'll be presenting the same thing to them that we presented tonight to these people and asking them to consider putting a warrant article on meeting warrant. Consider having the town consider voting on that later. They'll move for the purpose of developing affordable housing. So that's an opportunity to use comments at the select board meeting. And then if in fact they agree to do that, warrant article go on town meeting floor, it'll be discussed and there'll be an opportunity on the floor of town meeting to talk about the political economy of the project again. But the next step would be the decision the select board has to make about whether they'll put a warrant on the article or not. They decide not to put a warrant on an article on the warning. Then that's the end of the project. So I think the next goal will be done.
And I'm sorry, if I could just add, so ultimately, the design of the project, so should it overcome all of those various hurdles, then ultimately, they'll have to obtain permits from various entities in the town. The biggest one being from the zoning board of appeals, so they'll have to apply for a comprehensive permit. And that's when they get into the nitty-gritty of the design. So what the buildings will look like, where they'll be spaced, the grading of the property, where the driveway will be, what the landscaping will be. So that's another opportunity. I have no idea when that will happen. And they have to go through all those other hurdles first.
Can I ask that, is 40B comprehensive permit?
Yeah, it probably would be submitted as it's what's called a local action submittal. But it's a two-step process. It's approved by the state as well as from the zoning board of appeals. But that would be your avenue to speak, would be at the zoning board of appeals.
Lori, would they have to do at some point a traffic study?
It depends on the size of the project. I would think for 6 units, probably not.
Yeah.
If it were a big development, then yes. Obviously with the dog park under construction, I spent a lot of time up at Boundary Street, so I know exactly what you're talking about with the traffic. The traffic study would be typically done if there was a concern that the traffic from 6 units couldn't be accommodated on the road.
Okay.
And I think Boundary Street certainly can handle, 12 vehicles. Or, over the course of the day, 25 vehicles or whatever. So.
Okay.
Thank you again for coming. Didn't know you were waiting so long.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, we've got information and everything else too.
If our business is done, anybody want to make a motion to adjourn?
I sure do.
I think that's a motion.
I object.
John, all in favor? Right here.
Good night, Jeff.
It's kind of like my town meeting
Oh,
here.
by the way, Lori,
Tonight's meeting is like.
for the vote, there.
Oh, okay, Laura,
It's not just got added.
Nobody's
So,
gonna burn it like
Johnson-
5 years.
Yeah.
That way, that's-